Hi, I'm David Penn, Research Analyst with Finovate. Thank you for joining us for our latest Finovate webinar, Keep Your Friends Close and Your Data Closer, How Fintech Teams Grow Engagement and Digital Outcomes. Now, before we begin, I'd like to let you know that this is an interactive presentation and we encourage your questions and comments. So go ahead and use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen to send us your questions and comments about the presentation, and we'll be very happy to take them up towards the end of our session. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We've got 4 panelists with us and quite a bit to cover, so we want to get started as soon as possible. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves briefly before we get into the first set of questions. And Chye, perhaps we could start with you, then we would go to Julio, Alex, and Alka. If you could just give us a brief introduction so folks know just whom we're spending some time with today. Chye?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here. I'm Chye. I'm from Braze. Braze, we are a customer engagement technology platform, and we really focus on powering relevant, personalized customer experiences in real time. A few channels that you have seen us in action, in-app messages, push notifications, emails, just to name a few. Looking forward to our chat today.
Excellent. Very good. Julio, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Julio. I'm the VP of APAC and LATAM for Amplitude. And here at Amplitude, we help people build better products.
Fantastic. I'm going to hear a little bit more about that in just a moment. Alex, could you tell us a bit about yourself and where you're coming from?
Yeah, sure. I'm a product manager working at a company called Openpay, which is a buy now, pay later company focused headquarters in Australia, but we're also kind of in the UK and expanding out to the US. So yeah, excited to be here.
Excellent, excellent. And last but certainly not least, Alka, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am super excited to be here. I lead data and people as function in BukuWarung. BukuWarung's vision is to empower 60 million micro businesses in Indonesia to become financially aware, and would love to discuss this over the session.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, all of you, for being here from your different locations. Very happy to have you for what I think is going to be a really fascinating conversation about some of the things that have been happening throughout our industry in terms of digital transformation. Certainly the past year and the year we're in have been standout years in terms of digital transformation. And I thought maybe by way of starting things off, we could just get some observations, maybe some 30,000-foot observations on what you've been seeing in the industries and with the customers and clients that you've been working with in terms of digital transformation. And again, Chye, perhaps we could start with you, and then we'll move on to Julio.
Sure. Just a check. Can you hear me clearly?
You sound great.
Cool. Thank you. Yes, talking about changes and what we've seen, I always like to start with consumers. We know that in the past year and a half, 2 years almost, things have changed a lot. And if we look at consumers, what habits what's happened to them? I think habits that we thought would take years to change happen seemingly overnight. So, and we've seen various statistics on this, right? 10 years of change happen in a month or something along those lines. But one thing to know is what didn't change is that consumers still don't want to be marketed to. They don't want disruptions or have anything shoved in their face, especially if it's not relevant to them. So what this means is that what we've seen is that there are like a lot of heightened expectations and demands. And there's a big surge in the pool of customers digitally. So for businesses that might still be pivoting, they find themselves as suddenly in a short span of time, it's like a pressure cooker. Companies need to get it right very quickly. Well, the good news is that we've done some research, and I think it shows that things are on the right track. So we did a customer engagement review that was released earlier this year. We interviewed more than 1,000 senior marketing executives. And what's interesting is that 60% of the marketing decision makers say that their budget will increase in the next 12 months. And this was during a time when many countries were still struggling with the previous wave of the pandemic. And what's more interesting is that the top 3 areas that brands are intending to invest in are customer engagement, customer satisfaction measure, and mobile optimization and apps. And what we see is that it is not just for the startups, even the more tenured companies, they rank customer engagement as the first priority. that's even more than the younger companies that we see. So what we notice is that it's a great sign of change to come. More companies are focusing on their customers, giving the customers due importance. So customer engagement is going to be a big thing to watch out for.
Absolutely. Julio, your thoughts in terms of what you see? Chye brought us some interesting things with regard to heightened expectations and a real emphasis and investment on the customer. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I saw quite a bit of change. It went from an investment that you talked about. It went from an investment that you would bring up on an earnings call to sound like you're going to do something about digital products to actually having to act on it. And with the first couple of waves of the pandemic, for some banks, their entire acquisition funnel was shut off because the way that you actually, sign up for an account is you go inside. And if you're not allowed to go inside a bank, how are you supposed to sign up for something? So we actually saw a major shift there from people talking about things to actually doing things. And there was definitely some very clear trends that we saw towards not only just getting an app out there, which I think a lot of people have done, but actually making sure that that app works well. And so when you talk about sort of that dichotomy between the smaller players, the startups that are coming in and, some of the legacy players in fintech, what we really saw was that people that came from a digital native position really had strong applications with great user experiences. And, to Chye's point, like no one wants to be marketed to, you just want to be able to do something very easily. And you want to be able to get to what you want very quickly. And a lot of the first iterations of these apps were just to get something out the door. And so we saw that change and that demand for understanding how their products work so that they could actually react very quickly, so that they could actually make those changes. Because, if you're coming from a digitally native spot, like that's the way you think right away, right? Like BukuWarung, I think, has done a great job of that by just right at the very beginning, utilizing data to really drive the experience of the app. And I think that that's something that was a little bit new for some of the legacy banks.
Very, very interesting. Companies are starting to walk the talk. That's always a good thing. Alex, how does that sync with your experience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think in the last couple of years, especially 2020 and this year, the buy now, pay later space is definitely heating up. Some more kind of big financial players, like PayPal or the big four Australian banks anyway, starting to kind of, take interest after pays, pretty massively traded share. And I think it's getting more and more popular. There was a recent stat I saw the other day where almost 60%, so 56% of Americans had used a buy now, pay later product in the last year, up from about 38%, I think, the year before. So pretty massive growth in that area. Something interesting that my company Openpay is targeting, we're planning to launch in the US to kind of focus on healthcare and vet care and automotive, because there's a pretty big gap in the market there. I think also something else which is quite interesting is a lot of diversification in some of the other kind of major players as well. So Afterpay signed a big deal with Westpac and they're launching a banking service. So that's a pretty big diversification for a buy now, pay later company. Other BNPLs are offering virtual cards and looking to enter different spaces like crypto, for example. Zip and Amazon have both kind of announced that they're looking to go into that area. And there's a lot of other kind of financial products that are already kind of merging those. I'm not sure if anyone's in the States or has used Cash App, but Cash App is kind of similar to Venmo. It's like a money transfer app, but you can buy Bitcoin, you can buy stocks, you can transfer money all from inside the app. So I think in the last couple of years, traditional finance like banking has been tested quite a lot. And I think there's been some pretty big crypto booms, especially in kind of DeFi and some of the other stuff in the last year. So it's going to be interesting next year for sure.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing up a couple of the industries that have certainly been in the headlines in financial services and fintech, BNPL for sure, crypto certainly, and sort of the return of these wallets. Alka, what are you seeing from your perspective, both in terms of, we talked about the customers, we talked about some of the different industries. What is it that's really catching your eye in terms of what we're experiencing here in this sort of maybe late to post-COVID era?
Indonesia was already on a rise with digital payments. I think for a country like Indonesia to adopt digital payments was an interesting peak we were going through before the pandemic period. But as soon as COVID hit the country, there were two very interesting trends for us that we saw. One was that the consumer automatically moved a lot more to online shopping. And the second was contactless payments. For online shopping, e-commerce grew at a rate of 37% last year. That's massive. Even though for a country that was growing aggressively, they had only projected a growth rate of 22%. And 37% was a big, massive surprise. So customers were trying to order everything online, from their clothes to the groceries to the smallest and the simplest they could find, which is an interesting trend because you're able to get customers' needs, customers' experience, marry them together. As Chye said, you can sell them something more relevant just by gathering that data. Second thing that I found really interesting was adoption of contactless payments. Even though the country is very heavily driven by cash, payments has been a very hot topic and a rising topic for Indonesia. Something from a customer's point of view we saw changing was that people started preferring alternative payments method like wallets, Dana, Ovo, Linkaja, as compared to a traditional bank transfer. So when you marry the user moving online and getting digitalized with having online payments as a measure to get the means to ends, I think that's a very interesting future we're seeing in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate, one of the most fascinating things that I've found in this era has been where you see the rise of contactless and digital payments in economies and in markets that are very cash preferential. And to find that even in those societies, the conveniences, the circumstances that encourage folks to pursue digital options are still powerful. So it's really fascinating to hear that. Maybe we'll get to talk a little bit more about that as well. One thing I want to talk about, since we're talking a little bit about the customer and about digital, is the relationship between digital and data. Well, we talked about certainly digital gives a lot of advantages and conveniences for consumers. It also gives a lot of opportunities for folks on the other end with that data and things they're able to do and perhaps potentially better serve their customers. Of course, we know, as Chye mentioned, you want to be careful with that, that one person's personalization is another thing's pain in the neck. So I thought maybe we could talk just a little bit about the opportunities brought on through the access to data that a lot of companies have that they never had before. And maybe, Alice, we could start with you, and then we'll move back to Alka, just talking about what you're seeing in terms of the opportunities and the challenges afforded by this new access to an incredibly powerful source of information that companies are getting access to.
Yeah, sure. So we just recently went through a process to onboard Braze, and then have just started kind of using that at the start of this year. And I think one of the kind of key takeaways from onboarding Braze and kind of going through that process is making sure you're kind of aware of your key flows, customer flows, product flows, different stuff like that, and actually kind of before you're going through some sort of migration or doing that, actually like mapping them out, working through them, and making sure you're actually tracking those like key metrics and key engagements rather, and kind of different events the customers would take, and really kind of making sure that you have those kind of squared away before you're worrying about capturing every other minute piece of data. I think if you're not reporting on those or not being able to track those kind of key metrics and key lifecycle events for your customers, probably start there, I think is the idea. And some other kind of good practices, I think, in that region or in that area around making sure you're getting good data in, and making sure you're focusing on, like there's small things, but I think they add to kind of the data hygiene and data quality at the other end when you're trying to do analysis. But things like, if you're doing like a regex or field validation, look at using different third-party services, maybe to provide ID data or address data, different things like that you can leverage. Or obviously costs a bit of money, but I think you see massive outcomes with data hygiene and quality and that kind of thing as well at the other end.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely a lot of things that go into data to make it usable and something that folks can actually take advantage of. Alka, again, thinking about the contactless payments, the rise of digital in a cash preferential society, the opportunities that open up, given the relative data that comes from a digital transaction compared to a cash one, pretty sizable, significant difference. What are you seeing, and what are your thoughts about that, again, that opportunity of all of this data now being available to some of the companies in the region?
I personally believe, and I will quote Spider-Man here, that with great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility. And I personally believe it a lot more in the world we live with, especially the digital data world. Every click that you are making on the app, it's getting stored somewhere, right? So the point of view that I hold is that you need to be much more responsible. There needs to be governance, security, compliance clients when you start collecting data. So collecting everything is not very feasible, especially when you're growing at a hyper-growth space the way we were. So what we did, as Alex also said earlier, we were very focused on how a user comes to the app. What's their journey? What's the business use case? And how are we marrying the experience and the business use case together? Once you get that recipe right, I think you'll get the right variables and the events that you would like to track. While you're doing this, it's very, very important that you understand the sensitivity of this data, because if you are revolutionizing the way they are making payments, which is from giving a cash transaction to a cashless transaction, it's a new world for them. So you need to be extremely careful about their national ID card, their bank account information, their wallet information. All of this is extremely critical and sensitive information, which you would like to store in your safe locker somewhere. But I also feel that with the sensitivity and the data collection, there's also another challenge. The challenge being that we live in a world where there are hybrid systems. There is a system which works in your pre-installed world. There's a system that helps you work with engagement. There's a system that tells you what is the customer doing in app. And then there's a system and an offline world which tells you how's the customer actually feeling about you. I think it's very important you're able to marry everything together. Everything sings in the same language. And that's when the first part of collecting data gets done. That's when you're able to get data in a clean, organized manner. The next part, which I feel is a challenging part, is taking that data into insights. That's where the gold mine is. That's where your business or your product will be able to make or create an impact for your customers. And yeah, I think that's what I feel about how this evolution of data with the ecosystem has happened for us.
Excellent. And some very good insights, that whole concept of a new world, the way that people I know have been talking about the relative frictionless, like if you give someone cash, you feel it in your hand, you see the dollars one by one leaving your hand, such a different experience from just pushing buttons or swiping and sliding, and how that turns, how trust becomes a different sort of thing, how there's so many things involved in that. Julio, turning to you on this question as well, some of the things about that new world, about the issues of system compatibility. I'm curious in terms of what you're seeing and what your thoughts are with regard to data and the challenges that companies are faced with this potential gold mine that they've got to be extremely careful with.
Yeah, I think to echo both, Alex and Alka, to kind of marry it together, here at Amplitude, we are very big proponents of North Star metrics, right? And so really understanding what is the key metric that not only equates to value for you as a company, but also for your end user. And if you can understand that, and really the way that you understand that is by understanding your business and understanding how you're monetizing and how that relationship between what you're monetizing and the end value that your customer gets, the better you do that will actually lead you to the right metrics to track, which is kind of what Alka was saying, which is if you understand that business case, you can then understand which metrics, right? And you don't need to measure and keep track of every single thing underneath the sun in order to drive those insights. And what we actually see is we see different states where some companies are coming to us and they haven't even launched their product yet, and we'll instrument with them. And it's a lot of hypotheses around how they're going to monetize, and we get to start clean. But we also come with a lot of customers where they've been tracking things for years. They've been tracking all kinds of data, and they haven't been able to get any insights. And a large part of that is actually not even from a technology standpoint, it's from a strategy standpoint. And that's why we really, really think about these frameworks. And anybody who's listening is interested, you can check out the North Star playbook, that we have. And, it's not something that's specific to Amplitude. It's really about how to think about driving, which metrics, finding which metrics actually drive your app. And so I think that's a really important thing. And that requires you to have an idea of how the business works and not just like, well, let's track everything underneath the sun, because at the end of the day, it's not going to drive those insights. And also to the sensitivity, you don't want to have just data being captured for no reason that can sit there and be vulnerable. You really do want to think about where you can get the insights from. And it's really interesting because I think people have had a lot of data for a long time, but recently there have been tools like Braze and Amplitude that actually allow people to act on it and drive insights out of it rather quickly. And one of the funny things I get asked right away is like, well, hey, Julio, like, why are you trying to get us to track less? Like, you're an analytics company. That means we'd even pay you less. And I'm like, because I want you to actually get an insight. And you can't do that. There's a cacophony of data and noise with your systems.
Excellent, excellent. I'd really like to take the next step with that conversation about that idea from data to insights. We definitely focus on the data because obviously without the data, you don't have anything. But the data on its own is only one thing. You really do need to come up with those ways of collecting insights. And you can really see how certain companies, those digital natives, have such a massive advantage over those other companies that you said that are really just collecting everything in the room and trying to figure out where to go from there. Chye, I'm curious from your perspective in terms of that bridge from data to insights, maybe discussion about how important that is, how challenging that is, and what you've seen about the ability of companies to be able to span that chasm.
Yeah, I think when we talk about technology, talk about data, there's a lot of confusion or buzzwords, if I might just say it. So I tend to like to look at things, and actually at Braze too, we like to look at things in kind of more simplistic ways. Because if you think about it, at the end of the day, whatever that we're doing, we're trying to reach out to a customer. A customer is not a robot, and they're not going to understand your wants and not. So you need to be able to kind of decipher that and kind of like what Alka had mentioned, what Julio has mentioned, you need to make use of it. A gold mine is useless if you can't mine it. It's just sitting there. It's just rocks, right? So I think how we look at it, so if I put technology simply, just look at it human terms, right? It needs to be, for you to be able to act on your data, the technology needs to be able to listen, understand, and act. It needs to be able to listen to the signals that the customers are sharing with you, and you need to be able to capture it, whether it's the right manner, like capturing only what's necessary, or in a very respectful manner, because one of the key things that consumers really, really care about these days is privacy, and it's going to be increasingly important. So it needs to be able to listen to signals. Second thing is that it needs to be able to understand what consumers are telling you, what their behaviors are. And you need to be able to classify and orchestrate whatever that's relevant and kind of take away all the noise. And then finally, the act bit is really about pushing it in the right channels that are relevant at that point in time. Real time or not, I think that's a separate conversation that we need to have. But I think that flexibility needs to be there so that whenever consumers do something and want to react to it, you actually have that option with you. So that's it, right? Very simple terms. Listen, understand, act. But the only way that you can kind of do that is if you can minimize silos, be it channel silos or team silos. Like if I look at it from just customer engagement, you've got SMS, emails, in-app push, key channels. If each and every one of them you need to craft and activate separately, you're going to get signals from different platforms. It's going to be very, very tough for you to synchronize. And it's just one customer that you're talking about. It's the same for teams, right? We want to make it easy for marketing teams to be able to implement easily, test, and get access to the results that they want. So it's almost like providing a technical tool for marketers who actually don't have a huge technical background. So imagine the empowerment that they have without going to the tech team, right? To say, hey, I need to send out this message to push out something. Can you help me do it? And then they say, yeah, I've got tons of things to do. 3 months later, it's over. So I think technology, data needs to go hand in hand. And I think especially from a technology front, it needs to be an enabler for marketing, for teams, for people to actually act on the things that we collect.
Excellent, excellent. I just want to remind our audience that this is an interactive presentation. If you do have a question, we've got a lot of things that have come up, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are a few questions or thoughts out there in the audience. Certainly feel free to send those to us, and again, we'll take them up. We'll save 10, 15 minutes or so toward the end, and we'll be happy to take up those questions, or even a comment about your own experience with digital transformation over this period. I'm sure that's something that we'd love to hear about, and maybe have our panelists kick around as well. So if you have a personal experience you'd like to share with us, feel free to do that as well. So one more thing I'm gathering is that while there's quite a lot of work involved, there's definitely a lot of value to be derived from those who do pursue the work and do it well. I want to go to the customer for folks, so which I brought up very much at the beginning as a place to focus. And I want to talk a little bit more about strategies for engaging them effectively. I think the point made about not taking so much advantage of this data that we're just in their face all the time, because that's something, as has been said, that customers react very promptly and very sharply to. So I'm curious maybe if we could talk a little bit about that idea of understanding customers better engaging them across the entirety of that life cycle, not just when they're first onboarded, but as they mature as customers with our organizations. And I thought maybe, Alka, we could start with you and then move to Alex.
For us, there's a small story I'll go here with. We implemented Amplitude in our very early days when we were 3 to 4 people. We implemented Amplitude even before we got our Google Workspace. So Amplitude was a very integral part of how we operated. Every morning, and this is a true story, every morning all of us would wake up and just look at our numbers on Amplitude. And we were addicted to Amplitude more than any social media platform. What this did for us was that everybody from the founders to the engineers, everybody was hooked on to understanding data and understanding customers. So we became extremely data obsessed. Since we became data obsessed, Amplitude helped us understand where in our conversion funnels are users getting stuck, or where in our retention are users not coming back to us. What are the probable cohorts that we could really re-engage by running different kind of campaigns, or more than that, run a research to understand why aren't they coming back. So I think having implemented something that simple at an early stage within high adoption gave us the flexibility and agility to think about customers from an end-to-end point, where we were thinking a lot more about conversion. Why is the conversion not going up? As compared to in early days where we could have worried about where is our data warehouse? Why aren't we setting up a data lake? So I think that freedom of having something that simple at ease to understand what your customer is going through was amazing. And the cherry to this cake for us was that everybody in the company could use this. You didn't need a data analyst. You didn't need a marketing analyst. Anybody could just look at the platform, figure out what the problem is, and could take an action, which made it extremely easy for us to use speed as a growth mode. We iterated quickly, we understand our customers quickly, and we built our product quickly. So I think building something like a data platform to understand your customer, something like Amplitude, really goes a long way. It has, I'm not even kidding, in my today's world, my team spends less than 10% of their bandwidth on reporting because they are actually solving for insights. Having something like this marries customers, businesses across team and democratizes the insights across everybody, which is, I feel, is a great place to be for early stage startup like us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to come back and talk a little bit more specifically about the relationship and the work between your company and Amplitude in just a minute. I wanted to ask Alex, as we're sort of going around the room a little bit, in terms of some of your general thoughts as well on customers and customer engagement. Again, this particular emphasis with that idea of engaging that customer early and then being able to continuously engage as they change, their needs evolve over time, as opposed to, again, just on the front end.
Yeah, sure. I think Chye raised a really great point before around Braze. As I mentioned, we just onboarded Braze. I think one thing we've seen is, and similar to what Alka was saying, is that it's given our marketing team so much more kind of freedom of use and freedom to kind of experiment and test different things with customers and not have to come to the tech team all the time, which I think has been really amazing. I actually kind of wanted to talk about one specific kind of use case that we built out through Braze, and to be honest, probably wouldn't have been able to do unless we were using Braze. If we were using a different tool, probably wouldn't have been possible. And also to touch on kind of, I think another point that Chye raised before around the, having all of your comms channels kind of coming out of one orchestration layer, which again wouldn't have been possible without that. So one of the things at Openpay we're really focused on is kind of cross-channel promotion and communication and kind of getting customers to, I try to purchase different products in different areas or different verticals. And so one of the things that we kind of, we've been constantly looking at that, for years and years. But one of the things we've just done recently with Braze was that this part's external to Braze, but we built a bit of a machine learning model to kind of determine what customers you would have the propensity to purchase. And that's based on, our existing kind of years of data or purchase data. And then we kind of built into Braze, if anyone's familiar with like Canvas, you can kind of basically put in a whole bunch of different things and link them together and do kind of crazy experiments. So we built a really big experiment to kind of check, if customers have purchased in one area, one vertical, say for example, fashion, then several days later, and we did a couple of different variations there, but several days later, serve them an in-app, right? And say, bought this thing before, you're interested in buying something again. Maybe we send them a push, maybe we send them an email. We kind of played around with that a little bit. And then, if they didn't purchase, if they didn't convert, then we looked at trying different channel. So we're like, oh, well, maybe you're interested in home and garden, or maybe you're interested in dental, or different things like that. And again, to be honest, that just wouldn't have been possible previously without kind of having that orchestration layer all together. Some of the other interesting things that we did was, as soon as we kind of started the customer on that journey, we actually quarantined them from any other marketing messages or promotions or anything like that. So we could actually make sure the data that we're tracking was as accurate as possible. And then if the customer didn't convert after the period of experiment, then we basically opted them back into the normal marketing. So we kind of take them out of the traditional stuff, run some kind of experiments on them, and then if nothing happened, kind of put them back in. So I think the power of kind of Braze and the canvas and kind of that was pretty much run by the marketing team, to be honest, without much involvement from tech at all. So kind of talks to that power and kind of really good ability there.
Yeah, very interesting. One of the themes or phrases, or however you want to call it, I'm hearing from both you and Alka, is this idea of freedom to experiment, acceleration and speed that's brought to this. I'm curious for both Julio and Chye, and I'll go to Julio first. Hearing this, how does this sound to you? Is this sort of what the point of these sort of partnerships was, to enable these sorts of capacities and this sort of freedom, as both Alka and Alex have talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. We talk a lot with our customers and people that are thinking about this problem, even that are not our customers, in the product management and marketing communities, about how to really attack that. And one of the first things that really always stood out to me, because I started in digital marketing, selling digital marketing technologies for the past 10 years, and essentially it's been the same story, which is, how do we get more people involved, right? And the way that you do that is through ease of use. The way that you do that is by making data available. The way that you do that is by having the right people in the companies, like in Alka and having Alex, right? Like, those people are very important too. So we always talk about people, process, and culture as like really the three things that are really important. And so it's not even just about technologies, although I love hearing about Amplitude, and I'm sure Chye loves hearing about Braze, but really there's a lot more to it, to that. But one of the things I would say is that to kind of bring it together is that if you have the right culture and everybody's looking at data, and to kind of tie together the early question, well, I have all these different metrics I can look at, or I have different channels, I have all this stuff, it can really be problematic. And so one of the things that we really want to help people think about, and is definitely resonating with both these stories, is how do you take that piece of data into insight, into action quickly, right? And so you can either do that by spinning up an entire engineering team to go try to figure that out, or you could just quickly, adopt a platform and instead worry on things that are core to your product, core to your marketing, core to your business. And I think once you have that freedom, then you're able to actually affect your business in a more meaningful way. And also the employee satisfaction is a lot better. And one of the things that also has stood out to me over the years is that when people are adopting, these types of products and they're being used properly, you have higher satisfaction of employees. You actually have better retention of talented employees, because people want to just work on their jobs. Like, most people just want to solve the tough problems, not be stuck with frustrating, systems that don't allow them to even get to the problem, right? And, I always tell the story about, have you ever walked into a meeting and you're like, hey, I've got this insight, I want to talk about this thing. And everybody's like, oh, nope, we don't use that field anymore. Oh, no, sorry, we don't, that's actually not the right data set. And it's like, the next thing you know, you're arguing on who has the right data set instead of actually arguing about the problem. And I mean, I've been, part of several fast moving companies now, and I don't have time for anything like that, right? Like, I can't even imagine spending time on things like that. Like, if my teams, brought to me, some argument like that, I'd leave the meeting, And so, all jokes aside, I think that's why, these stories, I think, are refreshing. And I think for people that are, either starting off on this journey, or people that have been on this journey, for quite some time, I think really looking at how do you collaborate together, and looking at how easy it is to get data, I think is something that is more meaningful to your company than probably you think.
Excellent. And Chye, I saw you nodding during a couple of Julio's points in there. Anything in particular that you wanted to underscore or bring that we haven't covered?
I think whatever Julio says, I'm just laughing, right? Because it's so familiar. Like, I think earlier on I mentioned about the study that we did, that we released. We had very similar findings. Like, the top 16% of the companies who are in the what we call the A status, like what did they have as their secret recipe, are things like working across team in a very collaborative manner, the culture of experimentation, and really it just goes back to technology being an enabler to do some of these things as humans. Sometimes they're just not that good in certain things. And we should be focusing our energies on things like we are good at, like emoting, telling stories, like getting your business in order, that kind of stuff. And the other point I wanted to add, right, is I think Julio also mentioned about focusing on business outcomes. That's just one thing that we kind of talk a lot in Braze and to our customers as well. This thing called high value actions. Essentially, you just determine, because every day you'll be like staring down 20 items that shit, what am I gonna, sorry, pardon my language, like 20 items that you need to act on today to kind of move your customer down the funnel, trying to get them to do something. How are you gonna prioritize? So this high value action actually allows you to kind of look at focus on actions that actually make a real business impact. And if you think about business impact, it can just be broken down simply into three areas, like acquisition, retention, monetization. Whatever you do should be driving to one of these, or two of these, or three of these. If not, then maybe it's not something that you should be kind of losing sleep on. So that's just the other thing that I want to add. Like, if we can focus our business on the right strategic outcomes, and if we can like let humans do what we're best at and technology do what we're best at, I think we're in a beautiful world.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought that up. That was certainly part of the theme, was not just growing engagement, but was digital outcomes. And I would imagine that one of the problems that that some companies have perhaps run them into at certain points was maybe losing a little bit of sight of that, maybe getting a little caught up in the process, maybe getting a little caught up in the technology, and losing a little bit of track on those outcomes that are the reason why they got involved in all of this in the first place. I thought it was a really, really helpful thing to bring us to. I think it's particularly helpful as we're coming sort of toward our the last couple of questions that we had, sort of our prepared conversation. Again, we've got quite a few questions that are coming up here in the Q&A from the audience. And again, I encourage folks who are listening, if you do have other questions, we'll get to as many of them as we can here in just a moment. But I did want to maybe at least close this section with sort of another conversation, having covered so much material, in terms of future-proofing business and what companies can do to make sure that some of the decisions they're making today are going to be decisions that will help them tomorrow and beyond that. And also where we've talked about how we don't want to be overly focused on technology, but if we could provide some sense from the four of you of where you do think the technology is taking us, if perhaps to make sure, as Chye's suggesting, for example, that humans are in the right spot vis-a-vis that rising technology. Maybe Alex, we could start with you and then go to Alka.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think in kind of the fintech space, event-driven marketing is going to become more and more popular, and be required more and more and more. I think just kind of blasting out messages to your whole customer base is probably not the place you want to be in, if that makes sense. I think in terms of future state as well, over the last couple of years, we've seen permissions, like user permissions or customer permissions, getting stricter and stricter and stricter. I think the big kind of thing that happened recently was Apple blocking ad tracking, and made it well, they didn't block it, but they made it opt-in, and the stat was something like 98% of people blocked ads on Facebook, ad tracking on Facebook. It's like, well, of course they did, right? So I think that I think your brand or your company needs to really kind of focus on trust. And be future looking for some of those permissions changes, right? They're only going to get stricter. Customers are only going to want to manage their own data more and more and more. So I think companies need to be forward looking in that regard. I think personalization, it's been around forever, right? But I think it's only getting more and more and more important. Like, you don't want to be, even if it's in a soft advertising, like an in-app message or something like that, if it's not relevant to you, why do you care? I think that's only going to get more and more and more important. And I think as well, it's a little bit left field, but the crypto space is getting more and more popular, right? There's more and more and more kind of everyday people getting into that space. That's a pretty different marketing proposition because in that space, most customers are anonymous. People don't have their email address, they don't have their mobile number, they don't have any personal information linked to them, right? So, if you're thinking about DeFi companies or crypto companies from a marketing and kind of future trending point of view, I think you need to think about ways you can market without some of those things, whether that's in-app marketing or product marketing or community building, word of mouth or referrals, all things you could power through through in-apps or push notifications or different things like that if people are using your product. But I think that's going to get bigger and bigger as well. So lots to think about.
Absolutely, quite a bit. Alka, your thoughts again in terms of either the strategies, tactics for future-proofing that you would advise, or just in terms of where you see the technology sort of trending and what companies need to do given those trends.
I think, as we talked about, right, customers are moving online. So the amount of digital data that we are creating is massive. So I think we are at times where we can use this data a lot more constructively, where you are able to design a very intuitive, with least amount of cognitive load and experience for a customer, that they are able to use the platform and actually get value out of it. For that, you might want to, a very fancy word that I would say is that you're able to predict at every moment what is the user's next step. You're able to engage and navigate and give them a very personalized experience of helping them get the maximum value in the minimum amount of time for them. And once you've achieved all of that, I think in order to achieve all of that, you need a very, very stable ecosystem. So I think a lot of platform and ecosystem work needs to happen for a future like this to come true, where everything about the customer is singing together, is stitched together, is in harmony, and is not exploited. As Alex said, there's a lot of trust the customer is placing with us while transacting or while making any kind of transactions. So I think being able to do this while giving the trust and the safety and the security of the customer in mind, I think those will be the very important aspirational areas all growing companies will have to at some point solve for.
Excellent. I really appreciate the point that you mentioned about the stability of the ecosystem and how important that is, that you really do have to have a lot of these parts working in unison. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to deliver the experience that you otherwise have done so much work to prepare. Julio, I'm curious in terms of your thoughts with regard, again, to future-proofing, as well as some of the thoughts that Alex and Alka have shared.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of future-proofing it with technology, it's very difficult, right? Obviously, we've seen lots of things go obsolete over the years. But I think one thing that really helps people is to, take from, Bruce Lee, you want to be the water, not the cup, right? And so what you really want to think about is like, how is our organization set up to consume things like data, right? How is our organization set up to take that data and turn it to action, no matter where that data comes from or the nature of how that changes, right? Do we have the right culture in place? And so I still think some of those adages around like culture eats strategy for breakfast and hyperbolic statements like that, is still, in my opinion, are probably one of the best things you can do to future-proof your company, is to make sure that you have talented people around you and, and having, mission-based work, right? And so that people feel connected to, a larger thing when you're, trying to solve these problems. I think those are still some of the best things you can do from an organizational standpoint. And then from a trend standpoint, we talked a little bit about personalization and predictive, and we definitely believe in that. We acquired a company last year, and they had some really interesting patented math, and they were named ClearBrain. And now we've launched this year, just a couple months ago, a personalization product and predictive products that can do all kinds of things, from predicting the next best action to actually creating cohorts of users based on prior things, and in search of how do you get to see, how collections of behaviors influence future desires, and you can do that anonymously. You can do that, very sensitively, and I think it's been a big, huge improvement for the customers that have adopted that. We've had, people increase, cart size and e-commerce, by 50%. We've had our media, customers do all kinds of crazy things, and in financial space, we've seen a lot of that actually with crypto. Particularly in the areas of like, if you bought something, a particular type of cryptocurrency, you may be interested in another one. So we've had a lot of really big successes on that. And I would agree that crypto is obviously one of the big things still. And, we saw a huge trend in that, not only last year, but continued into this year, where it's one of our, larger customer segments now. We actually work with the largest crypto market, all the largest crypto firms in each of the major markets from the US and so forth. And only, right now, 14% of Americans even own cryptocurrency, and it's still like only 50 million people worldwide even. So that market is like, to Alex's point, it's like, if you just look at, the TAM of that, right, the addressable market, it's absolutely huge, and it's gonna grow. But again, as those things change and as those things come, like, you have to have an organization that has the right people inside of it and the right culture, I think, to take advantage of it. And then, that's really, I think, what will help future-proof you.
Yeah, it's a great point. I do think that's one of the things I think historically that maybe has been undervalued was the role of culture in terms of really being able to make a lot of these things happen. I think certainly a lot, for a variety of reasons, there's a lot more attention being paid to that, but it's really great to hear all of you sort of underscoring the importance of that. Chye, I wanted to turn to you with this idea of culture, some of the other ideas that came up, the idea from data to insights to predictive analysis and the role that leveraging those insights another step further. I wonder if maybe we could just get your thoughts again, both in terms of the strategies or tactics involved in future proofing on the one hand, as well as what companies need to do about the technology trends that are oncoming as you see them.
So I think I agree with what Julio says, right? The organization culture, the humans, the basic principles need to be in place. Those are your secret ingredients. You need to keep them with you. Now, I think if you ask me about the future, the only thing that I'm going to say is the world is changing and it's going to continue to change. I think our crystal ball is kind of hazy, especially in like what's going to come. Like today there's TikTok. Tomorrow, I don't know, Clubhouse might become something else, right? Like something new is going to come up. Something's going to change. So I think if we go back to the secret ingredients, the basic recipes, right? It's going to be down to things like flexibility, adaptability, the ability for you to scale and change track. So if I look at it from a technology standpoint again, I think you need something that allows you to, if today you want to crawl, it should allow you to crawl. If tomorrow you decide to start running, it has to enable you to do that. And if you want to fly the next, in 2 months, you need to have technology that can actually allow you to pivot and change and adapt. So I think if I look at it that way, then it goes back to the DNA of how it's built. If you have got different systems that will kind of just tag together, then it's going to be a little bit harder for you to kind of get that going. Whereas if it's something that's built ground up for today's world, then your future is going to be like slightly nicer looking, I guess. So I think that's my take about the future, right? Just the fundamental principles of flexibility, adaptability, that needs to go into the technology partner that you choose.
Excellent. Makes a great deal of sense. I want to turn to some of the questions that have come in. We've had some folks send in a few questions for our panelists. We've got about 10 to 12 minutes left, so there is still time. If you've got a question out there that you'd like to ask, there's still time for that. But we do have a few that have come in, so let me go ahead and get to a few of them here. Let me take a quick look at here. This is one, it's directed to you, Julio, but perhaps there might be some of the other folks here on the panel might want to address this as well. And it's in your experience with working with fintech brands, which teams are leveraging product analytics? We talked about that a little bit. Can you please share more on how the adoption should be structured? Was the question there for you, Julio?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the name product analytics, so it kind of implies product managers and product folks, right? And we definitely, of course, see those. But what's really interesting is how we've seen marketing teams really adopt it. And there's a pretty good example I can use to share with you why that's so important. So you could imagine if you are somebody who sends, push notifications or emails, right? And so most likely you in the old world, or maybe today it's your world, but you would be thinking about what would be the metrics of that person. It would be like open rates, click-throughs, right? Things that would imply, quote unquote, a conversion, right? And so you would actually be incentivized to spam the heck out of people, right? Because you get more clicks and open and all that good stuff. And maybe your open rates, may dip, but if you get more people to click and you get more impressions or whatnot, like there's an entire, we've spent 15 years perfecting to get people how to, to get them to do an action. But what we haven't really been thinking about is like, how does that action actually affect something a little bit more long-term? Like, for example, retention, like Alka brought up earlier, or lifetime value, right? And so one of the things that people do today that we see are absolute game changers. And this is really, if you look at Silicon Valley companies like Uber and Facebook that really kicked off, kind of growth in terms of the way that we think about it today. They're focused on things like retention and LTV, lifetime value, right? And so you may want to look at, maybe a particular push notification you're sending, and sure, yeah, you've got somebody to open it, but like, did that actually have any correlation to the fact that they retained or they churned, right? And I think that this is something that we're starting to see now, where marketing teams are not just like, great, I got someone to download my app, or great, I got someone to go from an ad into my, my website, but they're actually looking like, okay, great, like if I do something in this channel, are they actually a good customer for us? And there's a very famous story we tell back in the States with a major ride sharing company that, worked with us on a particular problem, where what they wanted to do was to understand how they can get coupons to actually become profitable. Because if you think about it, if I give you free $10 off your first ride, I'm in the hole after your first ride. So if I want to make any kind of money, I need you to ride actually 3 or 4 times. And so if you think about it, it's not just another game of being marketed to, it's actually thinking about the experience they have after they've done some action in order to keep them retained. And we've been able to help a number of companies, particularly in the fintech space, also think about that. Because once you delete an app, I don't know about you, but I've never reinstalled an app I've deleted, and most people don't. It's not like in the old days where, you leave a website, you can just go back to it. In fact, your navigation bar will autofill, right, as you start to type it in, right? But when you think about an app, if you're giving somebody a poor experience, right? So if I'm a fintech company like Openpay or somebody, I think, man, if I lose this customer, I might lose them for a very, very, very long time, and none of my other marketing, will really be effective. And so, anyways, what we see is that teams that are really sharing product data with marketing and really getting those two teams, to work together. That's the magic sauce. And Braze and Amplitude have been doing that for a long time. Some of the leading, campaigns in the world. In fact, we had a very famous example of Burger King utilizing us for one of the most prolific campaigns of all time. US, they won awards for it. It's like one of the best viral stories of all time. And if they really look at what they did, was they utilized in product behavior and best in class orchestration to really work together to make sure that it was something that was relevant and actually caused people to, become customers that were actually good customers for them.
Excellent. A great example. So is there anyone else who wanted to touch on that topic? And it was shout out to Julio, but I saw a few heads nodding, so there might be some thoughts that are percolating among our panelists. Anyone else want to jump in? No, we're good. All right, that's good. A lot of agreement with that one. There was quite a bit of really helpful stuff in there. I thought that the examples that you provided about those teams working together and then being able to, in a sense, the sum is more than the parts, I think, is definitely something I think that comes up. Here's another question, and again, Julio, it was pointed in your direction initially, but we'll see if folks want to share on this one. And let's see, fintech brands, are of different scale and scope, ranging from digitally native solutions to more traditional banks. We talked about the differences there that are now entering the digital landscape. What are you seeing in common among companies that are succeeding? What are the winners doing right, I guess, is another way of looking at that. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to, again, the collaboration comments that we had between departments and the ECUs. And I think, Alka kind of talked about this, early on about, just kind of waking up and being obsessed with the data. And that can only happen if it's, it's easy, right? And Alex touched on that too, right? It's like, hey, we were able to actually effectively drive these campaigns because we had one orchestration layer. We didn't have to coordinate between a million different people, right? And so I think one of the things is, finding the right platforms that allow your teams to really work together effectively. And, one of the interesting things is, we're known as a, predominantly product analytics company. Now we're broadening our scope into a little bit more things like A/B testing and personalization, recommendations, and all that stuff. But one of my favorite things about Amplitude is this feature we call Notebooks. And Notebooks is literally just a way to share data between teams. And it's not something that I think when a lot of times customers come to us, they're like, oh, I need something that is like a notebook that's around like sharing, right? Or knowledge management. But it actually ends up becoming one of the most effective tools for a lot of our a lot of people that are, really succeeding. And, that's not something that's, we invented. Yeah, we invented that tool because we know that's a problem. But again, going back to, people like Reforge and, sort of like the pioneers of growth, from Andreessen Horowitz and all these, Silicon Valley guys, like, the way that they really thought about it was that it's a team sport. And there's like the famous example of, Facebook getting you to add 7 friends in 7 days. And they found that one metric, which, took product and marketing and other teams to work together, actually was the #1 driver of growth. And once they found that, they just focused all their energy on that and were able to succeed and faster than anybody else, and completely destroyed the incumbent, which was MySpace at the time, which nobody thought, probably that would even be possible. And so, again, these are just examples. One of my buddies is a founder of Robinhood, and this is the exact principle that they had, which is like, hey, how do we, get data into the hands of our product management, our marketing teams, to make it seem like we are just one company, one brand, very cat heavy, very millennial driven in terms of that. But, at the end of the day, what it was just the coordination between the teams ended up becoming, a differentiating factor.
Excellent. And I wanted to kick this one also to the panel. I do find this is one of my favorite questions on these topics of all, is you have different sorts of players, different sorts of companies coming to you from different positions. Some of them succeed and some of them don't, and we don't always know which ones are going to be which. And just trying to figure out what is it that, what is it the winners have in common, even if they're coming from different places. And I always find that one of the most interesting questions, because often some of the most interesting insights come from that, the surprises as well as maybe the sure bets. So certainly if there's anybody who wanted to maybe chime in on that in terms of their own experience, what marks the winners, what they have in common, that would be really interesting.
I think I can start.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Okay, go.
I would say customer obsession. If you're able to understand your customer at every point in time, understand why are they here, not looking at them as a metric or a number or a data point, looking at them from an experience point of view. What are they thinking about while using the product? What makes their life easy? What makes their life difficult? What value are you bringing into customers' life? And for everything that you launch, if you keep asking yourself this question, I think you'll get the customer story right. People would love you. There will be an adoption of whatever you're building. So customer at the heart of the problem and obsessive customer problem solving. I think that's where I have personally seen products being successful.
Makes a lot of sense.
That's exactly almost what I was going to say. Like keeping customers at the heart of what you do. And I think it's about building human connections, and it's something that needs to start from the culture of the company. So when you're developing product, if you keep in mind the value exchange that Alka just mentioned, it comes quite naturally. It becomes almost organic, and it's something that needs to kind of be embedded within the company's culture. This whole thing about human connection. I think if I look at Braze, I mean, we are a customer engagement platform, and it's interesting how even within the way we work in the company, it's human to human, even though we are a tech company. So it's a culture to kind of bring that to life.
Absolutely. I definitely think if there's one thing that as I'm sort of looking at my notes and some of the things that I've heard, culture, flexibility, adaptability, and really those business outcomes, really sort of knowing what you want on that end. This seems to be incredibly important in helping guide that process, helping keep on track. We've only got a few minutes left, and I'm just going to apologize in advance for everybody whose question that I wasn't able to get to. Do appreciate you providing your questions for us. They've definitely, some of them I've sort of maybe combined into one. I thought maybe just to finish, maybe we could just go around the panel, just sort of maybe your top takeaways, again, as it relates to some of the things that we've talked about in terms, again, what is it the companies need to do? How does it the companies need to prepare themselves to be able to do the things that they need to do? Maybe we could just take, and maybe we'll start with you, Julio, Alex, Alka, and we'll finish with Chye. Just to get some of your top takeaways in terms of what you think companies really need to be focused on, maybe at this particular stage in where we are in terms of digital transformation, the sort of post-COVID era, that sort of thing. Yeah, what's up with you?
Yeah, I think the fastest thing, I'll go quickly here because I've answer a lot of questions. But I would say that the number one thing is to really start thinking about your customers and the data that they have, and really start informing the decisions you're making from a product and marketing standpoint based on that. Because if you think about pre-COVID, post-COVID, most of your pre-COVID data is not applicable anymore. And so that can pose a lot of problems for people that have spent a lot of time, energy, collecting a lot of data and building ML models and different things, because a lot of those models went out the window. And we work with a company where that was a very serious thing, like Traveloka and other Airbnb and those folks, and their models were changed overnight. And so I would say that customer centricity and making sure that you have something to track data today is very important.
Excellent. Alex?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the same thing. I mean, I think the customer obsession is just massively important, and then the North Star metrics, again, massively important. I think, I really liked Alka's thing about, showing up to work and kind of like looking at the data and everyone kind of being on the same page. I think like the collaboration there between teams is just like so massively important as well for future growth of the company.
Okay.
I'd say the trust part. I think we've already talked about customer obsession. We've already talked about building from a customer's point of view. I think building that trust is a very important part, considering we're going to be in a post-COVID world where the customer may not physically see us. Everything they would look at us is from a screen. Now, those are unprecedented times. We have never solved for trust, building trust with someone just on a virtual screen. So I think not taking a customer for granted and actually thinking about solving for trust and security for a customer, that they feel comfortable coming back to you. I think that will be a very interesting challenge in the coming couple of years for us.
Absolutely. And Chye, what do you think?
I would just say start now.
Yeah.
Like if you're not on the bandwagon, just start now. Like there's no need to wait. Because it is really about just getting ready, prepping yourself for what's to come.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And maybe an excellent way for us to end. Time to get going. So I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us for a very, very fascinating conversation. I feel like we could have spent even more time, both in some of the general things as well as some of the specifics that each of you all have been involved with regard to digital transformation in your different markets. A really interesting topic that we are definitely going to be talking about over the balance of this year and certainly into next, as companies hopefully take Chye's advice and get going sooner than later. I do want to thank all of our attendees for joining us. Again, apologies if we didn't get to your questions. You might be able to reach out to our panelists individually as well for some of those questions. I do want to let everyone know that the presentation will be available on demand afterwards for those of you who've registered. That'll be available on the Finovate blog in the days to come, so definitely keep your eyes peeled for that. So we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Again, I want to thank our panelists, Alex, Julio, Alka, and Chye, for a fascinating conversation. Very much enjoyed talking with you, and hopefully we'll get to do it again sometime soon. And again, for Finovate, I want to thank all of you for joining us. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you next time.